research that is having a positive influence on sustainable development and human rights, and peace and justice as well. And I think these are really important contributions universities can have. As with all good academics, I decided also to Google and check what it said. And actually the best definition that I came up with was one that was used by Oxfam, which was being someone who's aware of and understands the wider world and their place in it. They are a citizen of the world, and they take an active role in their community and work with others to make our planet more peaceful, sustainable and fairer, which I think talks a lot to what the first two speakers have said as well today. And that one really, I liked it because it wasn't filled with jargon as well, which was great. And I think there is a danger when we talk about global citizenship that there is a lot of jargon. And really what we don't talk about enough is what is the environment, what is the resource, what is the enabling environment we need to make sure that people can act as global citizens? What is it that we need to make sure that that's a reality? And that's something I hope that we can discuss throughout today as well.
I mean, the word that and I don't know if this will come up throughout the day, some of the language that I've been hearing and picking up, a disaster. I mean, this is, the scale, I don't think at times, and I've been to those parts of the areas that have been most affected. I don't think, even though we are in a very online space, I don't think the scale can really be understood. The fragile ecosystems that have been developed, particularly since 75 years of independence. And the word that keeps coming up when I was doing the work for this is extreme. Extreme flooding, extreme impact of climate. But, we know about climate change. Climate change has been happening, but what is happening here is due to carbon emissions of richer countries, and countries like Pakistan are really paying the price. Connected to this, in terms of anti-racism movements and global solidarity movements, there's a great deal of activism, but there's also, I don't know if people are also picking this up, around a little bit of compassion, fatigue, maybe a little bit of burnout over the last couple of years. And maybe that is having an impact. And this is just a question that I'm kind of asking. Is this having an impact on people's activism and also connection to what is happening in other parts of the world?
We are fair weather friends of growth at Wheel Scotland, not its ever faithful followers. There are absolutely parts of Scotland, of Glasgow, of Edinburgh that need to experience growth. But what is the composition and direction of that growth, and who is benefiting as a result of that? So we need to ask those difficult questions. And we know that GDP takes the good, the bad and the ugly and calls it good. So in terms of a wellbeing economy challenges us to channel our inner 5-year-old and ask, but why, but why, but why? So we can't shy away from those challenging topics. And I'm really glad Ifat's already spoken about colonialism and the impact today on different countries all over the world of that. And there are speakers better versed and who understand that better than I that will allude to that. But as part of a wellbeing economy, you cannot shy away from those difficult and challenging topics. So why is this important to global sustainable development? Delivering wellbeing economies is not something that can be fully achieved in one country. It is a global concept. Environmental limits are global, trade is global, inequality is global, and we know that the IPCC have warned us that we are in a rapidly closing window for the future of humanity with the climate emergency. And we know also that more than half of carbon emissions associated with consumption in Scotland is now happening abroad. So this is very much a global issue. We need an economy which acknowledges the inequity of current systems. Now, Oxfam and the Stockholm Environment Institute in 2021 reported that the wealthiest 10% in the world contribute half of the global emissions, hastening the move towards a climate emergency. So that is challenging because at the same time, those are the people that are not in the paths of the floods that we are seeing in Pakistan and China. They are not in the midst of those heat waves, and if they are, they can very easily move. And those that aren't contributing are in the path. So there is gross inequity in those that are causing the climate emergency and those who are in the path of its damage.
So how can we as people working in this sector make changes to our practice so that we do not perpetuate ineffective or harmful practice through our funding or through our investments? There are segments of philanthropy, however small, that are trying to shift philanthropic practice. that are trying to create a more enabling environment for the systems change work that movements are advancing. For the purpose of our conversation on the way forward, I'll share a few reflections about these practices that I hope will be useful, and then I'll wrap up my comments. First, let me start by saying that when I say grassroots, I don't mean it as an indicator of size, but rather as an indicator of where power sits. Given the evidence that transformative change is driven by autonomous movements and that enduring shifts depend on movements, the bet then on where transformative power sits is with movements built by people directly impacted by oppressions who are at the forefront of building just worlds and who operate, as Frances was mentioning earlier, in local, national, regional, and global spheres.
A bit of imposter syndrome answering that question. Not an economist, even though I work at the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, but it's a fab question and stuff I'm learning about actually every day. For me, there are a couple of points. It links back to that definition of global citizen. What is our role in Scotland to make a difference? And I think the first thing we need to do is, one, be clear about what these elephants in the room are, so naming it. And the second thing is showing the way through our actions. And if that is saying that we will not invest in ways that enhances the fault lines in our economy that actually is so grossly unjust, not just towards those in what you call the global south and less wealthy countries, but also within Scotland, within the UK. We need to find ways and a system that can seek to change that. And actually, to John's point about what we measure, is really important, and making sure that we're measuring and thinking in holistic ways.
A very good morning to you all joining us here in person, and to everyone who is connected virtually. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening indeed, from wherever you're joining us from. And welcome to this session on climate justice, tackling past and future structural injustices. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Professor Tassine Jaffrey, and as Director of the Mary Robinson Centre for Climate Justice at Glasgow Caledonian University, it is my utmost pleasure to be your chair for this session. And joining me on this session is a truly remarkable and diverse range of speakers representing their thoughts and views. And I must say that it is this wide range of contributions that really provides the richness of the conversation that we're about to have. But before we begin, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Scotland's International Development Alliance for enabling this conversation to take place. By way of introduction, the title says it all: Global Citizenship in a Challenging World. One of the biggest global challenges before us is how we redress the injustices resulting from climate change. The significant impacts on people and society, especially on the most vulnerable, are very real. The recent floods in Pakistan, which we heard a lot about this morning, has led to loss of life and millions being displaced, and that only a few weeks ago. And only just yesterday, a super typhoon made landfall in southern Japan, leading to devastation and extensive impacts on lives and livelihoods.
Hearing that some of the people I met feel hopeless about their situation, that only their faith now keeps them going as they pray to God for the rains to even arrive or return. Most of the people I met in Wajir do not know that decisions made in faraway places in different parts beyond Kenyan borders might have something to do with the situation they are facing. Because what would they do if they knew that the actions of others, rich, high-emitting nations in the global north, had something to do with their predicament? I strongly believe these communities would definitely also hold them to account. They would do something to say to our leaders and big companies who are increasing the likelihood and intensity of these kinds of disasters to definitely do something to step up and take urgent action on this crisis.
This again demonstrates that although we're all affected by climate change, we're not affected equally, and the ongoing injustice at the heart of the climate crisis remains. namely that those affected first and worst have often done very little or nothing to cause the problem, and that their voices are far too infrequently heard in international decision-making fora. We know, for example, that women and girls are often disproportionately impacted by these events. So are young people, those in the global south. Scotland has long recognised the need for urgent action on climate justice. Since launching the world's first Climate Justice Fund in 2012 to last year at COP26, when the First Minister announced the trebling of our support for the fund to 36 million over this parliamentary term. Our Climate Justice Fund is distinct from and additional to our International Development Fund, and this recognises our common but differentiated responsibilities in addressing the global impacts of climate change. The fund, the Climate Justice Fund, will continue to focus on communities most affected by climate change, in particular ensuring the views and needs of those typically marginalised in such communities are at the centre of future climate justice interventions, and that in our partner countries in Malawi, Rwanda and Zambia. We're also continuing our support for WeDo, the Women's Environment Development Organisation, to address gender equality and climate action in the Global South. This will directly support the training and representation of grassroots and Indigenous women leaders from the Global South at COP27. We're also stepping up on loss and damage. This year's IPCC report have consistently reminded us that climate change impacts are happening now across the globe and are even more severe than previously understood. The global community lost decades in failing to take action to mitigate these threats and is falling short on adaptation financing to guard against the impacts.
As I'm finalising, I just wanted to appreciate that throughout the years, a Scottish government has been able to support Malawi in so many in different ways to solve climate-related challenges, but also other developmental challenges. Most recently, I think for the last 5 years, we've seen the government of Scotland supporting Malawi through partners like SCARE, TROCRA, and our own organizations, CISONEC, to support communities to understand their climate and environmental rights, to advance the climate justice issues, but also to implement and promote locally led adaptation initiatives.
What I would like to do now is to invite my next speaker, Maggie Chapman, MSP, who is the Scottish Greens spokesperson for justice, equality and human rights. So Maggie, thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Tessine, and thank you for inviting me to participate today. I'm not going to repeat what you've already heard Mary McCallan say. What I want to do is say a few words about what I and my elected colleagues are trying to do as part of the Scottish Government, as part of the Scottish Parliament, not only as elected politicians, but also as community campaigners and activists alongside many of you in different places, in different ways. We are committed to doing what we can to honour Scotland's commitment to be a good global citizen, to take our global responsibility seriously, and to do the work needed on peace and justice, climate action, and importantly, on loss and damage. We are clear that environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice are inextricably and absolutely linked. It is not possible to have one without the other. And taking a global view, we clearly have a moral imperative to act for climate justice for all. The actions we take locally in Scotland must be consistent with our broader aims for global sustainability. And it is this policy coherence that was a key theme of our discussions with the Scottish Government last year that led to the Butte House Agreement between the Scottish Government and Scottish Greens. We secured the new ministerial working group on policy coherence for sustainable development to try and ensure that actions across government are consistent with our approach to international development, including our commitment to promoting human rights and equality internationally, and our work towards climate justice for all. And we need to be supporting democratic engagement at every local level across the globe too, not just in Scotland. Rejuvenating local democracy can help equip communities to manage adaptation and mitigation of climate change. So we have our work cut out for us. Much of how governments operate in siloed departments must change. The climate challenge is interdisciplinary, interdepartmental, so our response to it must also be. Indeed, we cannot deal with issues such as the global commons, which is really what we're talking about here, the things that are common to all of us, wherever we are on the planet, with the structures and processes that have got us into the mess we are now. So we need concerted actions, and I heard Francis earlier talk about the partnership working that is so important, which is why events like today are key. Networking, learning from each other, hearing from the lived experiences of those who are at the brink of disaster, the brink of catastrophe. They must be paramount in our decision-making. They must be paramount in our policy-making too.
Sajel, thank you very much. Please do stay online for questions. And my final speaker this afternoon is Katrina Spaven-Dawn. She is an environmental and gender justice activist from UN House, Scotland's climate and gender team. So very warm welcome, Katrina, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tessie. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you to the Alliance for the invitation. Thank you, Tessie, for the introduction. I'm delighted to be representing UN House Scotland. We are a women-led, volunteer-run civil society organisation that engages local communities in the goals and values of the UN, both here in Scotland and through international partnerships. By acting as a bridge between civil society, the Scottish Parliament and the UN, we stimulate conversations and collaborations through various teams such as human trafficking, nuclear disarmament, humanitarian approaches to human rights, and climate and gender. Our podcast series in the Climate and Gender team, connecting women's voices on climate justice, perspectives from Scotland and around the world, has brought women together to share community solutions to the climate crisis, from building healthy food systems in Quito, Ecuador, and Dumfries, Scotland, to getting youth involved in Scottish peatland restoration and circular economies in Nigeria. In an upcoming podcast episode, we will bring together feminist activists from Abya Yala, Latin America, to discuss community feminism and what Maya Xinca activist Lorena Carnal terms the body territory, el cuerpo territorio, linking extractivism and patriarchal culture as two systemic injustices that simultaneously wreak violence on the land and on women's bodies.
And finally, the immoral offshoring of our asylum responsibilities through the appalling forced deportations to Rwanda. Now, against this backdrop, it's easy to feel pessimistic, but we can't afford that luxury. Instead, over the next hour and 15 minutes or so, we're going to explore what it means against that backdrop to be a good global citizen in 2022, and indeed how we can maintain and strengthen our commitments to a decolonised, anti-racist approach. We'll be exploring the individual and collective actions that we can take to see progress across these many intersecting crises. And we'll do so firmly with a lens of global citizenship education, and not just within formal education sectors like schools, but in community settings, in public bodies like the NHS, and from academic and practitioner perspectives, as well as in, we hope, different geographic contexts. And nor will we be unquestioning. Is it naive to say global citizenship education as the antidote to vested interests? Is it capable of unlocking progress to end entrenched racial, gender, and climate injustices while ending poverty? Can it act as a vital counterbalance to fake news and the denial of expertise? And can global citizenship education really help us to understand not just the world as it is, but crucially, how we got here? In doing so, can it shape our contribution as global citizens so that we avoid repeating the mistakes of the past and further entrenching power imbalances, whether through continued so-called white gaze or the perpetuation of extractive capitalism? Again, something that's come up again and again today. These are big, big questions, and I can't promise we'll resolve all of them, but we'll do our best to explore them together with the help of as I've said, a fantastic panel. So let me introduce our speakers today, and apologies in advance if I butcher any of the pronunciations, and it's great. I see that God Love is up on there on screen. Here on stage with me, firstly, though, we have Bobby McCormack. Bobby is the co-founder and CEO of Development Perspectives, a NGO based in Ireland, which specialises in global citizenship education. He's on the board of DOCATH, an umbrella group for Irish development NGOs, and I'm told in 2017 that he was recognised as, quotes, Global Citizen of the Year. Now, if that's not a title that we all covet, I'm not quite sure what is. Also on stage, we have Dr. Bernadette O'Hare, a senior lecturer in global health at the University of St Andrews, and also a senior lecturer in global health at the Kamuzu University of Health Sciences in Malawi.
I mean, I'm not here to talk an awful lot about development perspectives. You can figure out who we are online, but I would like to speak to you a little bit about my experience of global citizenship education. I am conscious of the fact that I'm not an expert in the Scottish context. So maybe some of the remarks you'll have to forgive are more from an Irish practitioner, but with some experience of having worked and lived in Liberia, Tanzania, Vietnam, and different parts of Europe. So I do hope some of what I mention resonates with you. I'd like to just maybe go through maybe 4 general points, and as Jamie has said, then leave some of the meat of that to the conversation, if that's okay. The first thing I would like to mention is around lifelong and life-wide learning. I think when referring to global citizenship education, far too often we're led to believe it's beginning or ending in school, and that can't be the case. Certainly in my kind of context, adult and community education is key. And I will come back to that, but I think it's really important from a policy point of view to see how often lifelong learning is referenced. Yet even at different stages of this morning, we're talking about education, but we're referring to it in a way that it's got to do with school. And I think that's a little bit of a blind spot that we need to overcome, or is it? Because I think that that's often a strategy of policymakers. Because I think too often they try to depoliticize global citizenship education, and one great way of doing it is keeping it for young people and children. Because God forbid we talk about things that are challenging with people who can vote. I'd like to just comment on sometimes how GCE is talked about in terms of challenges for the future. I think it's a trap that we need to be really careful of. There are no end to the challenges that are facing our world or worlds, depending on which way you view this. But certainly, as Jamie mentioned many of them earlier on, I think sometimes it's important to look at GCE of having the potential of co-creating and writing the future or futures. And that it's not necessarily having just the skills or the resilience for getting ready for challenges, and challenges will come. It's by encouraging people to write visions and futures that maybe those challenges don't exist. And which brings me to the next point about, I suppose, the importance of language and stories and values. Like that language matters. And that earlier on today, it was mentioned a few times, small Scotland. I mean, I know it's only possibly a throwaway remark, but it needs to be in a GCE setting challenged.
And we quickly became aware, of course, that we weren't global citizenship education experts, but we were lucky enough and fortunate enough to work with experts. Scott Deck helped with us, met us where we were, and developed a fabulous suite of resources suitable for anyone working in the NHS, not just health professionals, but anywhere. And just in the view of time, we have some of the resources here if you'd like to see them. But it's to help people to really sort of think carefully, both as an individual, but also within the institution. So, for example, we have cards for every SDG, and on the first card, which is no poverty, it says the NHS is one of the largest organisations in the world. Do the purchasing choices of NHS Scotland play a role in systems that perpetuate inequality? So you can imagine as a group for example, at the level of a district health board who are interested in this subject, sitting together to discuss these issues and how enlightening that would be for many people.